Houston no longer has a problem. Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri Appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the case of David Huston. He's a Cedar Rapids, Iowa resident, Lynn County resident up in Iowa. And he was charged with assault and leaving the scene of the accident after he drove through a series of protesters on the street who were protesting the Roe versus Wade / Dobbs decision back in June of last year. I think this is another episode or another example of bad prosecutorial decision making. I think that in the totality of the circumstances, it was a bad call. I can understand why it was brought, and certainly there was a legal basis to bring this particular claim. But there was not a good, solid prudential basis to bring a case against somebody. And what's really interesting about this case is the defense that was employed. So, just generally, what happened back in June of last year, the Dobbs decision came down, and lots of people decided to take to the streets and protest. Now, protesting is an American ritual. It's a right. The right to petition the government for redress of grievances, which is often taken as a synonym for protesting, is written into the First Amendment. In fact, let's review the text of the First Amendment here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, one of the key phrases in the First Amendment is peaceably assemble. So, peaceably, that adverb modifies the verb assemble in the First Amendment. And basically what it describes is the right to say anything you want to out in public, as long as it's not so profane or so loud that it disturbs the peace of others, and also that there be no violence associated with it. And one of the things that I think people just sort of inherently believe, and you see this in the Daniel Perry case out of Texas, which is that they somehow have a right under the First Amendment to block traffic. Well, just as the law doesn't prohibit them peaceably assembling, it doesn't permit them to disobey traffic laws and disobey the standard rules of the road with respect to how you cross streets and the use of crosswalks and lights and that sort of thing. If you cross against the light in any American city and you get seen by a police officer, you're going to get a ticket. Whether they call it jaywalking or crossing against the light or whatever they call it, the bottom line is it's against the law. You shouldn't do that. There's a reason for that. Because when you cross against the light and someone doesn't see you because, their cigarette dropped into their lap, or they spilled coffee in their lap, or some other something that disturbs them at the moment when they should be looking forward, it's a good way to get run over. And that's not a good result for anybody. And especially it's not a good result in the situation where you're out there with a whole bunch of other people. Now, the reason that people do it, of course, is to cause as much disruption and as much of a problem for the authorities as they possibly can. That is essentially what's at issue. Now, if you want to organize a march and march down to City Hall in almost every city in the country, you can go to the police and say, hey, I've got a march organized. We're leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we're marching down to City Hall, and we're going to be there for an hour and hold a rally. And the police will block off your route. They will station police officers and police cars, among other things, so that you have a clear path and you can all walk down that street, and that's fine. That is the way the system is supposed to work, and it protects your right to peaceably assemble. What you can't do is just decide as a mob that you want to stop cars. They do this a lot now in England over the oil, and they do really stupid things like throwing paint on priceless works of art. And it should really upset people, and I think it really does. And that's their point. They want to upset people. But you shouldn't be able to destroy property in the process, and you shouldn't be able to damage property in the process. So I'm going to show you a little clip of footage that was shot on that day, and then let's talk about it. Now this is in real time. Look at how quickly this event goes forward, and look at the actions of the people who are the victims, supposedly. Well, if we slow down the footage, here's what you're going to see. Watch the alleged protesters here with their signs. There are several of them banging on the vehicle. And in addition to that, you can see them standing in the way trying to push the car back, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Nobody stops, nobody gets out, and then the truck gets away. So to understand this a little bit better, let's take a look at what the law is in Iowa with regard to assault. An assault, as defined in this section, is a general intent crime. A person commits an assault when, without justification, the person does any of the following: any act which is intended to cause pain or injury to, or which is intended to result in physical contact, which will be insultive or offensive to another, coupled with the apparent ability to execute the act. Any act which is intended to place another in fear of immediate physical conduct, which will be painful, injurious, insulting, or offensive, coupled with the ability to execute. And 3, intentionally points any firearm, which doesn't apply here. So let's think about this and what that actually means in the context of this case. The key phrasing here is without justification. Now, one of the reasons that I mentioned traffic laws earlier is that the defense in this case is, I don't understand what they're complaining about. I had the right of way. The light had changed. Indeed, the light was green, and I proceeded through the intersection. Now, although there were people in the street and in the intersection and in the crosswalk doesn't give you a right to disobey the traffic light. Now, one of the politicians, and we'll look at her tweet here in a little bit about what she said about this event, one of the politicians, local politicians, was there in the protest area at the time this occurred, and she said that it was a reckless disregard of human life. And what was really interesting, at least to me, in this was her cross-examination.
And understandably, people were pretty disgusted that somebody would have such reckless disregard for human life.
People who put themselves in front of the truck didn't have reckless disregard for their safety?
The truck was on the other side of traffic and chose to go into a crowd of people.
If I'm walking down the road as a pedestrian and a truck approaches me, or a vehicle, isn't it reasonable to assume that I should get out of the way?
It does not give you a license to run over people.
As people often do when you ask them a tough question on cross-examination, she doesn't answer the question. The question was, isn't it reasonable to get out of the way if you see a truck coming? And of course, the answer is yes, it's reasonable. And most rational, reasonable people, knowing that a truck weighs a lot more than they do, carries a great deal more mass, and could potentially hurt them, when they see a truck coming, get out of the way. They do not stand in front of it and put their hands out on front of the truck and try and stop the truck. So one of the things that's important here is there has to be an intent, right? It's a general intent crime, and it has to be an act intended to cause pain or injury. So intent is a key point here. So one of the things that happened is the defendant actually took the stand, subjected himself to cross-examination, and basically said, I was just trying to get home. I had my wife and daughter in the car, and these people were beating on my truck. I believed I had the right to go through there, and they got in front of me. And if you look at the video, that's actually what happened. They got in front of him. It wasn't that he started through and they moved out of the way and one of them accidentally he accidentally clipped one of them with a mirror. No, they got in front of him and tried to stop him. And so his thing was, look, I didn't mean to hurt anybody. I just wanted to get home. And I think that has a resonance with a jury who, if they put themselves in that situation and you've got a bunch of people out there beating and banging on people's cars with placards, would they want to just go home? Sure they would. Now, the prosecution did have some good points, I think. They said, look, he could have turned right, he could have turned left, he could have avoided this whole mess. And if he really wanted to get home, he could have just gone a different direction. He could see that this thing was up here. He should have just gone in a different direction. And I believe that would have been the prudent thing to do. Okay, I absolutely do not question the fact that, and I think that's one of the reasons that made this legally appropriate to bring, because you could rationally infer that he intended to harm people when he went that direction, knowing that there was a disturbance there, a protest or whatever you want to call it. But in that situation, the thing that I think really makes a case like this hard for the prosecution is you get 12 normal people, particularly in Iowa, some of whom are going to be farmers, some of whom are going to be business owners, many of whom are going to be Bible-believing Christians who don't think that abortion is right, and you're going to get an acquittal, and that's exactly what happened here. So let's take a look at the tweet that this politician put out, and we'll go through that, and I'll have some comments about that. As you can see from the data over to the right, she is a council person. She says, I take my duties to look out for the well-being of my constituents to heart. While I am surprised and disappointed in the outcome of today's verdict, I respect the judicial process. As an eyewitness to these events, I earnestly stood up for the constitutional rights of Iowans to peaceably assemble and protest. I'm sorry. If you are out there in traffic and you're beating on somebody's truck with signs, you are not peacefully assembled. You are not peaceably petitioning the government for redress of grievances. You're just having a temper tantrum in public, and you're damaging people's property. As a result of that, I find it just a bit disingenuous. Not to mention the fact that if she really took her responsibilities seriously, she would have organized a march and obtained police assistance in cordoning off the route. But she didn't do that. So, in my opinion, I think that this is her reaction to a verdict that she didn't like, but I think she fully expected it. I am left with great concern for the dangerous precedent this sets for the protection of peaceful assembly and protest, and how it further emboldens dangerous disregard for the safety of pedestrians. Well, first of all, it doesn't set a precedent. It's an individual case. There's no law that's being written as a result of that. And this is clearly someone who does not understand the idea of precedent. We have a sickness in our society when keyboard warriors feel comfortable suggesting that this driver should have accelerated or laughingly encouraged that protesters should be driven over like speed bumps. I actually kind of agree with that. This is not something you should make fun of. I am thankful no participants sustained lasting injuries. I stand in solidarity with all who showed up that day and since for various depositions and testimony, and ask that you not be discouraged. I hope that in my lifetime our rights are codified and we will regain our civility. Well, Ms. Vanomi, I think the first step in regaining civility is actually doing peaceful protest and actually going out of your way to be kind to the people who both support you and don't support you. Because, as my mama used to say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Now, the prosecutor who represented the state in this case is a gal by the name of Heather Jackson, and I think people online have reached the wrong conclusion that this is somehow something that's been orchestrated by the council member and this particular prosecutor. I don't believe that in the least. The actual elected county attorney or district attorney in that area is a man, first name is Jerry, I think. And obviously, if he hadn't approved this, there would never have been a case that went forward. So I don't think it's people who have commented on that generally are the kind of people who don't do enough research to figure things out. It's interesting to me that, like I said, the defense that was used is probably one that I would not have come up with. And I consider myself to be pretty smart and pretty creative, but I thought that was brilliant. You know, look, I have a right-of-way. I have the right-of-way. If you are in the middle of the street after the light turns red in your direction, you're wrong. And, you know, I'm not wrong in trying to proceed through because I assume that you're going to get out of the way because you don't belong there. Anyway, that seemed to have resounded with the people in Lynn County, Iowa, who heard the case and who acted as the jury. And I think it is a right and just result. I'm sure there'll be people who disagree. I'd welcome your disagreement. Tell me what you think. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening and for watching and for all of the comments that I've received. Again, you guys are fantastic. And I hope you get a chance today to do something nice for someone else. And catch me down here at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.